Guys, welcome back to Rough Cut Faith. I'm gonna miss saying that. Guys, it's been a wild ride, and we are here at kind of a season finale, if you will. Don't want to bury the lead. And I don't want to speak for these guys, but it's not like this is the last time the show will ever be a thing. But in its current iteration, for those of you that were here on Sunday, you had heard. But for those of you that were not, I am sunsetting, being a part of this team, going away for a little while. But I kind of wanted to spend today. Everybody loves a good clip show, right? And so you kind of go back and you think through things. But there's this thing that's been teaming and toying around in the back of my mind, really even before stepping foot into the Grove. It's something that has taken a lot of forms, a lot of functions, and I want to talk about it. It's this idea of community, and we've talked about that some here. And one of the things that has had my attention throughout all of this is what's happening in my spirit, that my definitions that I walked in with, my presuppositions that I walked in with, are all starting to get retooled, maybe refined, and things like that. And that's kind of a big thing that I think I've learned during this time is, for as much as we care about different things that we care about, things that we're passionate about, things like that, you have to keep what you're thinking through within a biblical worldview. Now it may sound like I'm going here, there, and everywhere, but hear me out here.
Don't really have a choice, Joe.
When you come in, I should say story time for a second. I came in antagonistic to the Sunday morning model, very skeptical, and touched on this a little bit, but I figured my full and complete thoughts would come out here in this venue where we have a lot longer to be able to unpack things. I came in with this idea that the Sunday morning model could not foster the same level of community and relationship as a microchurch could. That's heavy-handed, that's bias, it's all of those things. But it's what I walked into this setting with. And so I think at first I held relationships at an arm's length away. I kind of, knowing that there was an expiration date to the whole thing. But B, biasness like that. Like, I could not wrap my mind around the idea that this could be anything more than just a room full of individual groups on a Sunday morning. And so we started putting in the reps every week, showing up every week, engaging every week, doing this. And I realized, entering into this, my idea of community was based more out of a gospel of social justice than what it meant to biblically be in community and love each other and all of that kind of stuff wherever you're at. And so getting a chance to engage over the last year has created a template for me to be able to say, okay, this is where I'm choosing to play right now, and so now I'm exposed to this different way of doing it. And the entire time I'm watching, and I'm like, okay, people are engaging with each other, people are doing for each other, people are filling my criteria of what it meant to be a community, but at scale. And by at scale, I mean generally a microchurch expression doesn't go above, some maybe go up to 20, something like that, but generally at that point, you're thinking about spinning off and multiplying. And so I entered into this with one thing in mind, and just being real and honest, was exposed to the shortcomings of where I was coming from, in light of biblically, this is what it looks like to just love others regardless of your presuppositions. And so I found myself in a weird spot, right? Coming in, almost looking to have an environment where I could prove that I was everything that I said that I was, got into this ego head trip at first. And it was actually our conversation the first time that you said to me in your old office, "Oh, Joe, I think you're called and qualified." So if I'm coming in with an ego trip, and that would satiate that, then it's on me to say, okay, then what now? And there's still a long runway. So what now? And so that was the point where I needed to take a step back and say in full humility, I need to shift. I need to grow. There's limitations in me, and I need to be aware enough to say, I thought I had the beat on this thing. Turns out it looks like this. And now it's a matter of saying, oh, hey, I've moved on these things. And that same exact blueprint could be taken a lot of different ways. Like there are other theological swings that are separate from the growth that throughout the last year I have changed my stance on, and things like that. So that same template could be taken and used in a lot of different ways. But that's kind of when I talk about bringing forward this idea of community. It's this time talking about it in terms of how that concept has been the catalyst and springboard for me to now come forward and say, I think it's responsible for us as the people in the front of the room to say, hey, along the way, we think we have beats on certain things, and life, experience, scripture, the Spirit, God forces us to come face to face with that, and then be willing to say, okay, now the onus is on me to go ahead and pivot.
It's maybe a slightly different illustration of what you just described, but I think you would probably get it because you haven't lived in this one place your whole life. You've lived in a lot of different places. Right. Same thing for me, West Coast, up and down, and then to the East Coast, and then up and down the East Coast, and then I landed here with no intention of staying in this region. But when you've lived in a lot of different places, you begin to realize there's some things that are just really comfortable about all of them. And there's some things that are really desirable about all of them. And all of them have their challenges. All of them have their issues. And so you don't want to live blindly to the issues of a place. But you can begin to go, okay, where am I now? And how do I live presently here? We had no intention of staying. We were going to move back to the West Coast after we got married, and it was like, you know what? This is an okay place. This is a good place, and we could see ourselves here for a long time. And so, for the short term, we were like, let's stay. And I think in a lot of ways, that describes sometimes how we approach church and the different models of it. Like you can live in one expression of church and only see the benefits of it without seeing the challenges that expression builds. Or you can live in one expression of church and only see all the challenges of it and miss some of the beauty that could also be there. And I think the older I've got, I know what kind of places I want to live. And so I'm not going to like move in to a neighborhood or an expression of church that kind of grates against some of the values that I really want to shape where I'm at. But that doesn't mean that I live blindly or naively to the challenges of all the places where I'm at, and also can learn to appreciate the beauty of different things, and that's a weird space to go from a place of real strong confidence of what you're not liking to, okay, I understand that that's not what resonates for me,
Yeah.
but to go, but there's some really great people in that neighborhood,
Yep.
you know,
Yep.
and learning to live in a collaborative
Yeah.
effort.
I think there is a shift that happened for me when I realized that I didn't have to be friends with everybody in the church.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I had the same concept of community, that if I really believe in community, then I'm going to have a personal relationship with every single person here.
Yeah.
And then and you look at that and go, it's 120 people. I can't, you know.
He
Then
doesn't even like to hang out with me.
yeah, I don't even like you guys. So
You guys should see in the moments before we hit record, kicking and screaming.
oh
All
yeah,
the
they
time.
dragged me into this, and I can't wait to leave.
That's actually true.
We have, so I felt, and it did change, like, if I feel like I need to have a connection with everybody, you can't get bigger than 20.
Yep.
The church has to be
That's
small.
tough even at 20.
At
It is.
20, it's really tough. But if your responsibility as a church leader is to foster community and allow the culture of the church to be a church that embraces community, that's not up to me or you to be the catalyst for that community
Yeah.
to develop, which means you can have multiple groups of 20 or 10 or 5, and community is being lived
Yeah.
within that connection or within that context. So once I let go of being the catalyst for
Yeah.
community
Yeah.
and realizing that I'm not that important, then it was easier to say, okay, I think this works.
Yeah.
Now, I still struggle with seeing a church of 500 or 1,500 and
Yeah.
saying
Yeah.
community, like this is the community. At that point,
Yeah.
I don't know what the criteria is
Yeah.
because that's like going to high school and saying, I'm friends, like I know everybody in this high school.
Yeah.
This is our community. But I still think that a community, to define it, is a shared set of values. And so if you can define, these are the values of this community, if we all ascribe to these values and how we live out our faith according to these values, then yeah, a community can develop.
Yeah.
So there is kind of like this separation between what's the community and what's a relational aspect of that community. Maybe a community of 2,000 is possible, but the relational aspects are going to look different.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really weird, the way you describe it of when I pivoted away from me feeling like I had to be the catalyst, while also trying to clarify the values of the
Yeah,
community,
yeah.
trying to nurture opportunities for that community to develop. Like those are things that, like that's hard.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
even in a sense of at a church of our size where, you know, if somebody like somebody has a family member that passes away and you go, okay, like who goes?
Yeah.
Who is the pastoral presence there? Do we all have to go there? Do we
Yeah.
all and that's like one of those like weird dynamics of trying to process. How do you do that?
Yeah.
Because whether you feel connected to everyone, that doesn't mean that they don't feel connected to you.
Yeah, yeah.
And trying to navigate that boundary or that understanding of how do I still help, even if I'm not necessarily like at everything or doing everything. And how do I and that doesn't mean you care less for people. It doesn't mean you anything there, but it does become the challenge of when you're a smaller church. Okay, well, there's only a handful of things that I'm gonna
Yeah.
go to. The
Yeah.
challenge is as the city gets bigger, as the community gets bigger,
Yeah.
is how do we still keep building community that is a transformative place?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's the important element of it. Is it transformative? Because,
Otherwise, it's a country club?
yeah, and there's no purpose to it other than, like, it's community for community's sake. But the flip side of community is the damage.
Yeah.
Like, community is not a silver bullet that just makes everything better.
I had to learn that lesson the hard way. So for those of you that don't know, along the way, one of the myriad of things that's happened over the last year is I came into this shepherding house church through a series of events and circumstances and situations. The house church imploded. And it left me in a weird spot, right? Because I was here and doing things here, but this was secondary to what I thought my main expression was. And part of the issue that I realized after the fact is a bunch of people came together because they had been hurt, looking for a way to remedy that hurt. And so if you develop a community, then there's shared support. There's this phrase that you hear a lot when you church plant, like, do not create a bond of bitterness. Like that, any church planting organization or somebody who's experienced with it or whatever, anybody who's worth their weight in salt will warn you, do not, and all of us, I don't want to speak for you guys, but many of us hear that and we're like, no, we're not doing that.
Yeah.
Well, here we are. And that left me like, okay, what did I do wrong? What went wrong? All of those kinds of things. And namely, if I'm going to try to maintain a ministerial presence in this area, where do I go from here? What changes? What grows? What adapts? All of that kind of stuff. And that's a weird pill to swallow. And you don't even think about how weird of a pill that's, because you think if community helps, then how can it be this thing that's ultimately ends up as a negative, or not in any way actually addressing what brought everybody together in the first place.
That I think is the pivotal point of community. It's what do you gather around?
Yeah.
Like that's so critical because it's a shared experience.
Yeah.
So you gather around a shared experience, and I think that when Paul talks a lot about gathering around the cross, like that's what brings you all together. There's no more. There's no male and female. There's no Jew and Greek. There's no more slave and free. There's no more of these things, these separate things that keep us separated into segmented groups.
Yep.
There's this one body that follows Christ. So the foundation, the reason we get together is the cross, is Christ. If there's any other reason to get together, then it's probably going to show up in ugly ways later on. So I think you had an interesting story when we were starting the church.
Oh, yeah.
Someone met you in a parking. I don't remember the story itself, but I remember.
I got stopped in a parking lot. There was another congregation that we had been a part of before we started the church, and kind of came out that we had left and we were looking to begin the Grove, and there were some other things going on within that body at that point in time, and some folks were hurt, and so somebody that was there came up to me, approached me in a parking lot at Walmart, and said, "Hey, are you looking for disgruntled members of this congregation?" And by God's grace, I said no.
Yeah, that was
So
your
we're really
first
not.
immediate
Yeah,
answer.
it's like,
too,
no, we're
was
not. Like
Yeah.
because there is that piece that said, if you're leaving from a point of frustration, and it may have been founded, but if you're leaving from a point of frustration and anger, that's going to show up.
Yep.
And and the hard part is that people that are hurt, people that see and recognize things that are going sideways,
Yeah.
they still need a community
Yep.
of faith. And so like there's that weird sense of like you can recognize it and go, listen, this is an unhealthy foundation. It needs to be the right foundation, versus as well as also acknowledging that people who are hurt still need spiritual community.
Yep.
Yep.
And so don't be too hard on yourself if you're saying, listen, maybe it's the congregation that we knew and loved and cared about, and now it's like completely falling apart, or they're going down a different path or whatever. Like, there's that weird thing of going, for me at least, going, no, don't start out of bitterness.
Yeah.
But also going, I get that.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
so it's okay to still provide care
Yep.
for people that are going through the midst of it.
And that's how you become a place of healing, though, for people that are coming out of some connection or some context
Yeah.
that is damaging to them. You don't want to gather a bunch of people that are angry about it, that have shared trauma,
Yeah.
and make that the catalyst for
Yeah.
your community.
Yep.
But you do want a place that says, welcome you.
Yeah.
Like, I welcome you who have been hurt,
Yeah.
who are in pain. I welcome you to come here.
Yeah.
We gather around the healing presence of Christ.
Yeah.
And that's where you'll find healing. We're not here to compare stories.
Yeah.
Or,
Yeah.
like, if we have to counsel through that, then fine. But we don't get together as a group of 20 people and just
Yeah.
talk about how miserable we were over there.
Right.
Let's just bring back to the cross and
Yeah.
let the healing take place.
Yeah.
Or even if it's not outright stated, right? Where it's swapping horror stories or anything else like that. But it's this idea of this is good because it's not that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Is
Yeah.
just another on-ramp
Yep.
for developing that sort of culture. And I think where this goes from us talking about it in a leadership standpoint to folks, you know, to use a tool out of your guys' playbook to go to that application layer, you can take these concepts
Yeah.
of fostering community versus a bond of bitterness and all of that, like everything that's encapsulated in that, and you can transplant that very same concept into your own personal orbits, how you handle relationships, how you cultivate different relationships, and what you lead with.
Yeah.
Because it might sound like it's just addressing the same situation from two different language bases, but there's a difference from establishing the tone of the relationship with bitterness to accepting somebody in who has been hurt and pointing them in the right direction to get healing. It could be the same person, but they're two different perspectives and two different trajectories.
Well, I think it's maybe it's easier or more common, or I don't know if it's one of those, easier or more common, or it's just natural. But I'll say easier. It's easier to gather around something that you are against.
Yep.
So when your movement gathers around the thing that you are against, I am anti this, and you're like, oh, all of these people are anti this, so there's a lot
Yeah.
of passion against
Sure.
it. That doesn't last. What lasts is if you are gathered around something that you're for.
Yeah.
But that seems to be harder. It
Yeah.
seems to be harder for us to find a group, and maybe because the passion isn't there as much,
Yeah.
but like anger is very driving. So when you're all angry about something, man, you can form a mob really fast.
Yeah.
But when you're all for something, when you're like, let's make this happen, or let's be for people, let's be for this movement, that I think that lasts longer, and it's more positive, and it's better for the people. But we don't tend to see that happen as much, and I think that's why I just keep going back to community has to be for something, not just against something. We can always gather a group together to be against something, but where does that go? That's just like, that doesn't move anywhere.
Yep.
It just feeds the anger of each other.
That's I think that's it. What are you feeding?
Yeah.
Is it feeding fruit of the spirit?
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
Or is it feeding like the deeds of the flesh?
yeah, yeah.
Like and that's why I think scripture warns against it so much.
Yeah.
Is if bitterness is there, if frustration is there, and like as somebody that has experienced hurt and disappointment in church and in communities. And usually that happens because of an intense amount of care and love for that community that all of a sudden has either left you or put you in a place where you're just like, I don't recognize this anymore. It hurts because you love it.
Yeah.
Yep.
You love the community that's there. And so, you know, for those that are in the midst of that, you've got to be careful that you're not just reacting to what reminds you of that, but instead, as you said, what is it that Christ has called us to? What is it that when you see Scripture that you begin to say, this is what the body of Christ looks like. This is what the church looks like. Okay, I'm not going to give up on that aspect of my faith.
Yeah.
I'm not going to give up on my faith because something I loved changed, or maybe you changed.
Yeah.
You know, that's another aspect of it.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that needs to very clearly be stated is so many of us have church hurt stories. That's not rare,
Yeah.
especially for those of you that are in a local context with the incredible number of churches that are in this area. And I'm not singling anybody out. I'm not singling any group out, anything. Literally, take your pick. Ice cream shops open, 52 different flavors of nonsense out here. But it's one of those things that it can either drive anger or allow for you to maybe have a more merciful perspective on the situation. I know for me, one of the biggest stumbling blocks for me first entering into pastoral ministry is I didn't care to cooperate with anybody within the pastorate because I had seen so much, because I had been hurt, because my wife had been hurt, because of the backstory and everything. I had exactly zero trust and even less patience for folks. There's a term that now we can affectionately refer to it as and smile about it and all of that kind of stuff. But Scott experienced a lot of carjo at the very beginning. And yeah, I can be a passionate guy, but I guess for me, this is me coming to the table and saying, hey, so for all of the times that you guys saw me smile on Sunday or come in front of this camera and we talk about these things, and you've maybe heard, if you've been following the full story and listening to me struggle out loud about those things, this is me opening the door and saying, this is what, when I stand in front of the entire body of people and say thank you to every single one of you for the impact that you've had on my life, and why I say, yeah, you know what, today's the last day on the job as far as being a pastoral resident, but I call this place home. I call these people my family because everything that I walked through, somebody or somebodies has shown themselves up and said, hey, how are you doing? Oh, I'm fine. No, let's try that again. Or a hug, or these little things have shown me that, it is okay to trust. And relationships are risky business.
Yeah.
They always will be.
Yep.
But these things are not rare when we come forward and say, I have experienced what it means to watch a church a couple times just disintegrate or explode or implode or end with a whimper when it started so full of life. That it just, the temptation is to say, I'm not. And I had the silly idea of getting into the pastorate. Now I don't need to. Now I don't need to. I don't need to worry about this because now I'm the guy that's dictating the pace of the dance. If any of you are watching this that are interested in pastoral ministry, please understand, in no uncertain terms, that is exactly the incorrect mindset to have. Exactly 100%.
Yeah. it's cool to sit here and hear you process this stuff out loud. I think, and Mike, maybe you can speak to this some, I think in my observation, one of the things that I have observed in helping to care for folks, just generally across the board, but particularly those that have maybe come out of some painful seasons in church, or with church. I think often the Sunday model has this, we need to keep the machine running. And so if somebody shows up that's come from a church, it's, where can we plug you in?
Yep.
How can we help you? How can you help serve what we're doing here? And those are good things, right? We need people to help.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that maybe has been a characteristic of us is when somebody shows up that's hurting or has come through something, it's how do we help you find rest so that you can respond to the Spirit's healing?
Yeah.
And that takes time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And rather than just going, let's plug in, it is a what's best for you right now.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's just me thinking out loud or if that's something that you think your observation might.
I think that goes back to the foundation of starting a Grove, really. Maybe it was an intrinsic element of who we were because we came out of a church experience that tended to wring people dry. And maybe it was an overcorrection in the opposite direction, in that we almost went, all right, nobody gets to do anything.
Yeah, that's not helpful either.
No, for a while,
We're wringing ourselves dry.
yeah, we started with, we don't want to burn anybody out, so
Yeah.
we'll just take care of everything. You just come here
Yeah.
and heal up.
Yeah.
So we've backed away from that too, but yeah, I think it's just so important. I mean, you could probably attest to this too, both of you. A vast majority of the pastoral counseling that I've done over the last 13 years has been helping people recover from church trauma.
Yeah, it's a major part of it.
Single
Yeah.
biggest topic
Yeah,
that I've
yeah.
covered.
I mean, there's been other things. There's some marital issues. There's relational stuff. Like those are things that pop up naturally, being human and being part of a community. But bar none, like 95% is, I've come from church. This is my experience.
Yeah.
I don't know how many people who are here or who have been here who have said, this is my last stop.
Yep.
Yeah.
On church.
Yeah.
Like if this doesn't work, I'm out.
Yeah.
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 So I don't think it's too far of an overcorrection to see people as, to just assume if they're coming here in 6 months, we're going to hear about deep pain as pastors. If we get to know anyone, I give it about 6 months, and we will walk through some really deep hurt and deep pain with them.
If people open up about
Yeah,
it.
yeah. If
If they're going to open up.
if you form a relational connection with them and pursue that, you're going to hear it. So recognizing that, why would you 2 months in say, you'd be great with our youth?
Yeah.
You know, you don't know what trauma is going to come out. You don't know what's going to erupt within that context.
Yeah.
So it's protection for them
Yeah.
to come in and say, just relax.
Yeah.
You're not here to do more. You're here to learn to live in freedom. So do less.
Yeah.
Like, go easier on yourself. Do a
Yeah.
little bit less.
Yeah.
And then once you kind of have gotten the opportunity to rest and heal, then you can say, well, who am I now?
Yeah.
Because you've just run through the ringer.
Yeah.
You don't know who you are outside of that experience. You need the healing of Christ. You need the healing of the Spirit to get rid of whatever walls have been built, the defense mechanisms, all of that stuff. That needs to crumble at least just a little bit so you feel safe.
Yeah.
Now, how do you respond in an environment where you feel safe? You might be great in the nursery. You might be great serving at the mission. You might be great
Working with students.
working with students. You might, like, there's all these different areas that you could serve, and you might be great at that, but you don't know that
Right.
if you are just carrying the burden of pain and hurt and self-protection.
Or just because you've done that in previous experiences,
right,
right? And,
yeah.
and that's the temptation for leaders in churches, is to
Yeah.
go, oh, somebody's like, oh yeah, I used to be in ministry, or
Yep.
I do this, I did that, and you're like, ooh, like
Yeah.
your little
Yeah.
radar goes off of, hey, we've got a hole that could fill.
Yep.
You know,
Yeah. Yep.
and you know,
But I think not doing that, which is something that we've tried not to do, I think not doing that means we're more concerned about the community than the organization.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yes.
The organization will exist.
Yeah.
It has to exist. It will cease to exist if we stop paying attention to it.
yeah,
But it's like this backwards mentality. If we care for the community, the organization will be okay. If we don't have enough teachers for our Grove students, then some weeks the kids are in the service.
yeah,
Big deal.
Right.
I want them to have Grove students. I want them to have their own space where they're learning at their own pace. They have something presented. But if once a month we don't have that, and yet people are coming here and the community is developing and it's maturing and we're gathered around Christ and we're able to go out into our greater communities and make a difference and live like Jesus out there,
yeah,
I'll sacrifice
yeah,
once a month
Yeah.
to have the kids in the service
Yeah.
so that the community is healthy.
Yeah.
So not seeing people as cogs to keep the organization going,
Sure.
but seeing people as an essential part of the community to
Yeah.
help heal each other.
I think as you say that, I think of a handful of examples even where I'm like, yeah, we didn't do that really well in that instance. And I think that's part of the recognizing, like, you can have your ideals and your values, and it's so easy to drift.
Yeah.
And it's like, and I get why churches drift.
Yeah.
And it's the benefit and the beauty of having a team of folks that grasp similar values, that you're still learning and you're
Yeah.
still committed to some of these things, and so you're able to sit back and go, oh, you know what, yeah, we kind of dropped the ball for that family, or we kind of dropped the ball in that situation, because the need was great. And so we plugged somebody in. That, you know, the other option is, you know, you just start a pastoral residency and force somebody to
Give
deal with
them-
it, give them
give the resident
everything,
everything,
you know,
yeah.
so.
So anyone who wants to apply for the next year's residency,
Memoirs of a pastoral resident coming this fall to bookshelves everywhere.
hey, we promise not to move buildings in the
Yeah,
next
yeah,
year, so
yeah, that works.
that'll
You'll
be a
at
little
least be
different.
starting from a
Yeah.
better spot now. But to your point, even like with the building move, that ended up with me doing the stream. That was me seeing, like, okay, what we thought we were doing
Yeah,
has changed entirely.
yeah,
So what do I do?
Yeah.
I need to be like, there's got to be something. I'm like, okay, so if I'm doing digital ministry, having a hand in a digital, like as many digital components as I can, makes sense. And I make references to it, but I shoot a lot of content throughout the week. I do a lot of content production, all of that kind of stuff. So shooting, facilitating, doing these different things, all of this stuff was all second nature to me. But you guys never approached me about doing the stream. I approached you about doing the stream. And that was within the context of already establishing the residency and saying, like, you're going to be brought into the inside.
yeah,
I think there's something to this idea of allowing people to be able to engage first and then say, hey, I'm wired this way, or I think I might be wired in a way that says I'm open to this. Let me explore.
yeah,
And then with the idea of, okay, I explored, didn't like it, didn't have a taste for it. Let me back away from that. Or, oh, hey, I've come to really enjoy doing this. You know, let me, we'll keep doing it, sort of thing. And having that open environment allows for that illustration to take place, that I tried to lean so heavily on in January when I was in front of everybody, of the playground mentality of you get to go out and play. You get to use your gifts, your wirings, your personality, what makes you you. You get to use all of that for the context of the kingdom of God. And if we're so busy with filling in holes or keeping the machine running, we miss the opportunity to be able to cultivate an opportunity for somebody to explore how, because they may not know. It may be as simple as, I love to bake, and so I'm gonna, bake cookies for fundraisers, or I'm gonna bake cookies for somebody who does, something. Like, it could be something very, very straightforward, or it could be exploring something that's entirely new that you would have otherwise not had an idea you enjoyed doing, or you were wired for, or something along those lines. And it's that same exact notion that then brings forward this idea of, we are in this together, and if we are in this together, then the togetherness can impact North Scranton. The togetherness can impact our own individual orbits where we're at, and so on and so forth and so on. And that to me rings specifically special, because you guys are operating in my neighborhood. I've said this what feels like a million times, but this is home turf for me. I'm not driving in to the neighborhood to be at the Grove. So getting a chance to see the fact that there is a movement of the Spirit that is using the people of the Grove and bearing impact, that's particularly special for me, and that has to be mentioned, right? That idea of, yes, we are talking about the context of the Grove. Yes, we are talking about the people of the Grove. We are talking about the context of the last year. We're talking about specific people and situations, but don't get it twisted. This is a group of people receptive to the guidance and pull and counseling of the Holy Spirit, and living in a way that allows for the ideals that bring life, the ways of Jesus, to be reflected. It's conduits, not saying the Grove is this, specially holy place.
No, it goes back to that opening thing I talked about. Like, it's like living in different places. There's some really beautiful things about the Grove. The Grove has some challenges.
Yeah.
Right? But the reality is I love living here.
Yeah.
Like, I love this community.
Yeah.
And so that's how I think, the problem I think turns around when people are like, this is a great neighborhood, you can't bring anybody else into the neighborhood or else we're gonna lose the neighborhood.
Right.
No, the beauty of this community is not without our challenges. But no place doesn't have that. No church doesn't have that.
Yeah.
And I think in and around some of the things that you guys have said, and maybe this captures it in my head, is as the community of the Grove develops and deepens, there's an intentional patience with folks to say, like, spend some time.
Yeah.
Get to know us, let us get to know you, and we'll see what God has for us.
Yeah.
And so, in many ways, that has meant that we've had people that have come here that wouldn't necessarily choose to line up with the Grove in some things, but it was it was familiar enough that they could come. It was safe enough that they could let their guard down a little bit and begin the process of bringing some healing into their lives. And we've had the opportunity to walk with people for a season before they transition on. And there's that weird spot where sometimes a church would look at it and say, well, they should stay. They're supposed to be here if we're doing our job right. And I think for us, it's sad to see people transition out or orbit out, whether that's moving for work or just getting to a spot where they're like, you know what, we need to do something different. But the opportunity that we've had to be a part of God's healing in people's lives that are reeling from different things, like, somewhere in the church that needs to be a place.
Yeah.
Yes.
Somewhere within Christendom, there needs to be a spot for somebody that goes, I'm not ready to give up on Jesus.
Yeah.
Somewhere within Christianity, there needs, like, and there's places like that.
Right.
And I'm happy that we get to be one of those places for folks. It is not without its challenges. It is not without its organizational challenges. It is not without those things. But the beauty of a community of healing, the beauty of a community that is pursuing what it means to be a community of belonging, the beauty of what does it mean for us to pursue the ways of Jesus, not just as individuals, but together, that, like, that's the stuff that I get, like, that's why I love living here,
Yeah.
you know?
There's an inherent messiness in community.
Yeah.
Especially in community in
Yeah,
Scranton,
yeah,
Pennsylvania.
Yeah. Each region has its own challenges to that
Yeah.
messiness, and I think if we develop an ideal of what community looks like, nothing will live up to our ideal.
Sure.
It's true.
Absolutely.
So maybe it's always easier to just be alone for a time. It feels easier to be alone because you don't have anyone else challenging you. You don't have to navigate difficult relational experiences. You don't have to put up with somebody that you find annoying. Like, none of it. It's just easier to be at home alone. But what do you miss out on by being alone?
Yeah.
Like, I think it is inherent within every human being. We were just talking about this a couple days ago. It's inherent within each of us to want to be known,
Yep.
to want to be seen.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so if you live, it will be easier to be alone, but you do not develop as a human being alone. Everyone I know who has isolated themselves for a long period of time grows bitter. I've not met anyone who has lived an isolated life and then engages in community and is a delightful person to be around. And it's kind of like, you know, I've known some couples who have married in their 40s, and they've spent probably 25 years by themselves. And you go, oh man,
Yeah.
now I'm bringing someone else into my life after I've established 20 years worth of alone time. Those marriages tend to be very difficult. It tends to be really hard for people to learn to live together after a long period of time. And I think that it's in a similar way that applies to people who isolate. They just get used to being isolated, and it feels good for a while. And then to go into community after that isolation, it's like, I don't like any of these people because not because they're bad people, but because I have grown so accustomed to being by myself.
Yeah.
I've grown so accustomed to just having my own say. I make my own decisions. I don't have to think about anyone else. And that's
Yeah.
what it comes down to. I don't have to think about anyone else if I'm isolated. But when you live in community, you have to think about other people. And so you do develop as a person, but all of the messiness comes with it.
I think the sad thing in what you've described is that so many people exist among other people, not
Yeah.
in community.
Yeah.
They exist alone
Yeah.
in a group.
Yep. That's part of why I've said for a long time, you can have the rituals, you can have the routines, you can know the words to the songs, you can know when to say yes and amen. You can have literally the beats
Yeah.
of all of it.
Yeah.
You don't need God for any of that. What you need God for is the relationship piece. And I used to say that and specifically focus on the connection to God and the relationship between creator and created specifically. And that is a part of it.
Yeah.
But I have since expanded that out to say it is also necessary when it comes to relationships between person to person as well, because we need to be receptive to the things that make us safe. Because the truth is that in this context, you are almost certainly going to hit somebody who has trauma and hit somebody's trauma response.
Yep.
It's just the reality
Yeah.
of what it means to do relationships in general, but specifically relationships within a church context.
Yeah. Ugh.
It's one, but to in processing all of that, I want to extend out a word to anybody who has heard all of this and maybe has that thing in the back of their mind, even if they've taken the step towards community and things like that. That voice doesn't just go away when you make the conscious effort to engage in community. That is not the thing that quiets the voice.
Yeah.
So, if you find yourself in a position where you feel like you need to walk into the room with your fists up, if you are the type of person that feels like there is no possible way that I could engage with a group of people because it will only turn out poorly, it will only be a matter of time, or maybe not even that extreme, maybe I'm just hesitant because of this reason or that reason or whatever. Just like the theological premise thing, I want to give people the permission to be able to shift a little bit and be patient with themselves and say, okay, that might be where I'm starting.
Yeah.
But what's your desired, what direction do you desire to move into? And yes, there is uncomfortability in it. Yes, there is action that's required of the individual to respond to these things and to engage in all of that kind of stuff. But it's not a 0 to 60 sort of relationship. It's not a you walk in and are hesitant for a month, and then month 2 starts, and now you're off to the races.
Yeah.
That's not how it works. So, in some ways, engaging with this topic and simultaneously talking about the realities of relationship and simultaneously talking about the truth of how some folks that you may not ever know are wrestling with these things, are fiercely wrestling with these things every single time they walk through that door, or every single time they engage with relationship. And in some ways, this talking about the realities of all this proves the exact thesis statement of what Rough Cut Faith has been over the last several months. It is an open door to be able to listen to 3 pastors wrestle out loud, talk about concepts, allow them to unpack verbally, to kick the can back and forth, to explore different topics and things like that, so that way we might be able to display to folks watching that it is okay to be human, and it is okay to not have all of your ducks lined up in a row and have the beat on all of these different things and say, hey, I'm not quite sure where I've landed on that. Or, hey, I know that I'm a work in progress in that, because I think sometimes we mark things in terms of, okay, I've overcome that hurdle and I've put it in a box. The reality, though, is how often have we said this, have we had this conversation of we've gone through things in our 20s that we hit in our 30s, and man, I thought we had that figured out, and 40s from 30s and so on and so forth, and I'm sure that will continue on throughout time immemorial.
Yeah.
I think that's the way the Spirit works,
Yeah.
personally. I mean, I've kind of said, sometimes you feel like you've dealt with something, and then years later, something brings it back up again.
Yeah.
And you can either get really discouraged by that and just be like, oh, why do I still deal with this? Or you could go, this is an opportunity that the Spirit has brought into my life for deeper healing. And I think sometimes in church, we run away from it because it causes pain. We run away from vulnerability because it causes pain. It takes more, I will say, and it's not a shame thing. So please hear me in that. Sometimes it takes it's a more, I don't want to say more courageous step, but it's a courageous step to lean back into the uncomfortability of it and say, God, what else? Where is there more healing that needs to take place?
Yeah, yeah.
Because, and it's not the community that brings the healing.
Yeah.
It's the Spirit that brings the healing, that puts a context and brings like a realization of His sufficiency
Yeah.
in that part of your life. And so part of living with curiosity, part of living in vulnerability, part of all of that means that when those uncomfortable emotions churn back up, when relationships get difficult and you want to run, and I'm not referring to abusive or toxic, I'm just saying like sometimes there are shadows that creep up and churn up those feelings.
Yes.
Do you lean back into the Spirit and say, what do you have for me in this? Or do you go, I'm done?
Yeah.
Yep.
Like that's where I think it comes down, and hopefully the desire that we have is that we can recognize that in our lives, and that we can say, Lord, I'm willing for your healing process to happen. I'm reminded of that scene in the Chronicles of Narnia with Eustace and the shells, where he keeps trying to bring the healing himself, and eventually it's like he just has to submit to Aslan, who will remove the scales of the dragon.
Yeah.
And everything is sore and it hurts. That is a picture of our sanctification and our healing in my mind as we're talking
Yep.
about this.
Yep.
That
Yep.
that it's uncomfortable to go through it.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't willingly choose to like, cause myself pain
Right.
or vulnerability.
Yeah.
And yet, every time when I enter into that process as opposed to running from it, and some days you don't have the emotional energy for it, and that's where you need community
Yeah.
to come alongside of you and help support you through it. But when I enter into it, typically the healing that God brings, the reframing of things that God brings into my life, it's exhausting, but I would say it's worth the price.
Yeah.
At least I found that.
And it opens the door to not get hung up on things like where you're from, who you vote for, what your background is, what your stance is on this particular thing or that particular thing. All of these secondary issues that if you have an opinion, you have an opinion, whatever. But allowing for those the awareness of where we're at as an individual level, where the community is at, and engaging in love and patience and all of that cultivates a gentle nature towards another person that even if they completely and totally disagree with you or you disagree with them or whatever, still allows you to focus on the thing that binds us together as a group. So, guys, thank you. Thank you all for joining us for this ride. And like I said, things are not done here. So, what's next for Rough Cut Faith? I can tell you,
Yeah, Joe, tell us.
over the course of the next month, you are going to see a series of interviews that will culminate in a round table discussion with the three of us and Jeremy as well. Each one of the interviews hopefully will give you a look into the mind and the heart of your pastoral team. For those of you that were attenders of the old space, there will be a little bit of nostalgia because those three were shot
The
before
table's
move.
the same, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah. Those were shot pre-move, and then the round table was shot just a couple of days ago. So that's it. That'll be over the course of the next month, and then you'll just have to stay tuned for what the next season of Rough Cut Faith looks like. But again, thank you all for joining us for this ride, guys. Thank you
Thanks, Joe.
for joining me in this project, and we'll catch you down the road.